So if you're watching this, you probably have one of those fancy resin printers and you're thinking, can I print something other than Baby Yoda's off Thingiverse? Yes? Yes, you can. Welcome! If you're new here, I'm Jason, the creator of the Tabletop Battlefield, and today we're going to do a easy-ish 3D modeling tutorial for resin printers using Blender, which is an open source 3D modeling program. You can get that at blender.org, link in the show notes. And today we're making these little tokens here. I'm using them as resource tokens for Arkham Horror the Living card game. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and jump into Blender. So here we are inside of Blender. Let's take a quick look at the final object we're going to be making right here. That's the crate you see in front of you. Now, one quick note, an assumption I am making here is that you are somewhat familiar with the Blender interface and the Blender keys and all that fun stuff. If you're not, check the links in the show notes for another tutorial that I've done where I do a step-by-step process of creating a cosplay piece. Alrighty. Let's dive into the actual modeling process, and in this case we're going to do something kind of strange and start with the default Blender cube. The first step with the cube here is to actually change its size, so press N on the keyboard. That'll bring up the options for kind of the size information over here on the right hand side, and we want to make sure we change the X, Y, and Z dimensions to be 8. Then we'll, in the end, with a few modifications, we'll be left with a cube that's about 9mm by 9mm, which is a pretty good size for this game token. Now what I need to do is start laying out the shapes of the planks that kind of make up the edges of each of the faces of the crate. Now the first step of doing this, I want to make each side of this cube look like a tic-tac-toe board where you got 9 squares. And to accomplish that, I'm going to be using the loop cut. This is Control R on your keyboard, and you kind of move your mouse around, you see a little yellow line like you see now. Blender's going to make a cut basically along that yellow line. However, we want 2 on the side, so use your mouse wheel, scroll up to make 2, then hit left click twice. To create the tic-tac-toe pattern, we got to do something similar across the other 2 dimensions. So once again, start with a loop cut, Control R. Scroll up to 2 and move your mouse cursor around. You got 2 lines kind of going in the opposite direction. Double click the left mouse button. Then repeat the process one more time for the remaining dimension. And once you've done that, you should have a cube, like I said, that looks like you got a tic-tac-toe board on all the sides. For the next step, we need to know some exact dimensions of this cube. So what I want to use is a plugin built into Blender called Measure It. Now this comes with Blender, but you have to turn it on. So to turn it on, go up to Edit, choose Preferences, go to the Add-ons tab, do a search for Measure It, it's one word, and then hit the little checkbox. Of course, I've already got it turned on, but just once you hit the checkbox, it'll be turned on, close it out, and return back to the cube. Now what we need to do is add 3 measurements originating from one corner of the cube, and basically going to go along each axis of the cube from the corner to one of those inside ribs we just cut. So you want to select the 2 points of that edge, and then on the right hand side you want to go to the View tab. You want to click on View and then scroll all the way to the bottom. That's where you'll find the Measure It options. I like to increase the size of the font, and then click Segment, and then click Show, and therefore you're going to see your measurements start showing up. Now one quick disclaimer here. By default, these measurements say they're in meters. That's why I have a little M there, but the way Blender works by default, when you output this, those meters will actually be millimeters. You can go in and change settings and blah blah blah, but frankly it's just a lot easier in your head to just interpret that in this case the M, which should be meter, is actually millimeters when it comes to 3D printing. Alright, you can see here now I've got the 3 measurements marked out. Time to do some operations to reduce these tic-tac-toe boards into something that looks a little bit more like the planks surrounding the faces of the box. So now what you want to do is choose 2 of the ribs in the same dimension, and you're going to scale those outward. This will cause you basically to push those away from each other, and you want to do so until the corresponding measurement you see is changing there is to about 1.5. Because this is a symmetrical operation, when the right side over here is changing down to 1.5, so is the left side. As long as you have both ribs selected, you have a symmetrical operation and things will go quite well. Now I want to repeat the process for the other 2 sets of ribs you cut out using the loop cut. So when it comes to building these planks that run around the edges of the box, it's important to note that on a given side, 2 of them are long and 2 of them are short. You can see that as I'm looking at the finished piece right now. And then also the other important thing to note is that when you go to an adjacent side, those sides flip. So what were the short sides now become the long sides, and what were the long sides will now become the short sides. So to create the gaps between the planks, you got to use the most dangerous tool in Blender, and that's the knife tool. Now, the reason I call this most dangerous tool is it's a great way to totally hose up your model, and you can do some pretty crazy stuff with it because it's also a very powerful tool. So if you do kind of exactly what I tell you right here, you should be all set. If you do something different, well, it could go very, very bad. So you can see the knife tool is selected over there on the left-hand side. You can kind of hover over that icon, and it will say knife tool. And the important thing to do here, you want to cut this line on basically what will become the end of the short plank. And you probably want to cut it about 3 or 4 units away from what will become the long edge. Now, one just kind of quick divergent note here that is helpful. When you are modeling a very small miniature like this crate, you do want to exaggerate details. So even though obviously if you were to scale this thing up, that 3 to 4 unit thing will be a lot bigger and the gap will be huge in real life, for a tiny miniature, it's important to exaggerate that so you will actually be able to see it on the final piece. So to use the knife tool, what you want to do, you want to start by clicking basically outside the cube, and then you want to press C, which will lock the knife tool into a cardinal direction. And you want to move it basically down until you reach the line which represents the bottom of that plank. Now, when you stop on the line, you'll notice the line turns green. And you want to make sure you stop exactly on the line. Don't go over the line. If you do, bad things will happen. So stop on the line, press the left mouse button, and this will try to start a different line. So what you need to do is don't press anything else, just hit enter, and that will complete the knife cut. And when you're done, you'll have a little line that kind of creates a bit of empty space, what will eventually become the planks. Now repeat this process across this entire face by cutting 3 more of those lines, and then go to the other sides of the cubes and do the same thing. Be careful to pay attention to the rotation of what sides will be the long planks and what sides will be the small planks for any given side of the crate. And as an important little note here, if you're wondering, well, how do I get to the back of the model, right? Because 1 on the numpad will jump you to the front, 3 will jump you to the side. If you press Control and the numpad, it'll go to the opposite direction. So Control and 1 will jump you to the back, Control and 3 will jump you to the other side. That's a really helpful Blender tip, especially in this situation where you're trying to access the front and back of the model. So to turn these flat designs into planks, we're going to use first the Face Select tool. If you look in the upper left-hand corner, you'll see a little button there next to the View menu. That little button has a little square rectangle kind of sitting next to another square rectangle, I guess. That is the Face Select tool. That allows you to select faces. So what we're going to want to do is now select all the sides of the cube that are going to become the planks. You see here I've got the 3 faces of the long sides and then the individual faces that make up the short sides. Notice that the faces that represent the small gaps between the short and long sides, those are not selected. Now to add a 3D dimension here, we want to use extrusion. So press E for extrude, and this will allow you to move the faces out and away from the box. In the upper left-hand corner, you want to pay attention to the little numbers there as I'm kind of screwing around, moving the face around. Or that number is the distance you're extruding the particular piece by. And in this case, we want to extrude out probably about 0.5 or about a half a millimeter. And once you hit the left mouse button, you'll see you've got some 3D objects that look a lot like the side planks of the particular crate we're trying to build here. Now repeat this process with 4 of the other sides. You might have noticed that I'm actually not putting any details on the bottom of this crate. And well, that's because you've probably seen in the final piece, I've got a hexagon base here that I'm using, and therefore I don't really care if the bottom has any details. So extrude these pieces out along, like I said, the 4 other sides. That's the 3 other sides in the top, and then we'll move on from there. The last design piece that these crates have is that on the 4 outside sides, you've got basically 3 little planks that kind of make up the side. of where what now is kind of an empty space. So we want to build that area right now. For that, we're going to go and just create a new mesh. In this case, we're going to add a new cube. So Shift A, Mesh, Cube. And what you want to do is scale it to where it's about the size of one of those three interior planks. Essentially, you want to make it so that it scales out width-wise so that it kind of touches one of the long sides, or actually goes into the long sides a little bit. Its height is such that it's a little bit less than 1/3 the height of that empty space, because you want to have three of them and still have enough space between those planks so that you can actually see the fact there's empty space when it's printed. Now, you could go ahead, count the squares, and make up that empty space there between the edge planks, or just eyeball it. That's what I did. And, scale it to it looks about right. So with one of those planks created, we're going to duplicate it 2 more times. Hold down Shift D and move it in the Z direction. So you send one up a little bit above the one you first created, and then duplicate that one and move it down below. And what you should have is, at least here in your wireframe mode, you should be able to see what looks to be 3 of those planks with a little bit of space between each one of them. Now we want to turn these 3 guys into a single object, so Shift click on all 3 of them, then hit Control J to join them together, and I'm just going to give them a quick name over here so that they're going to be easy to find. Now this next step is going to seem a little odd, but it's going to help with spreading this design out to the other sides. Now these 3 planks are actually inside the cube at the moment, and we want to bring them to the edge. But before we do that, we want to make sure that the center of the joined object is actually at the center of where the original one was. It's 3D math stuff, but what you want to do is go up to the upper left-hand corner when you're in object mode. You want to choose the menu item that says Object, then Set Origin, and choose Origin to Center of Mass Surface. Now let's jump to Edit Mode. That's right, Edit Mode. So you're going to press Tab to get there. Or you want to select all the vertices that make up these 3 planks and move them to the outside such that they're kind of sticking out from the original base cube, but they're probably not as far out as the side planks. So maybe, 0.1, 0.2 millimeters in from the side planks. Now the reason why we're using edit mode here is this is going to keep the center of the object at the center of the crate, because all these things started life at the center, at basically 0, 0, which is the center of the Blender world. And you'll see in a moment here why that is useful. So now we need to move this pattern of 3 planks to the other 3 sides of the cube we're going to have it on. So let's just hit Shift D to duplicate and immediately just click the left mouse button. So we're not going to move it translation wise, but you can see that if you look in the collections hierarchy, we now have a second copy of this object. What we are going to do is rotate it. So on the right hand side there, you can go up to the Item tab, and for the rotation of the duplicated side planks, change the Z value to 90. And you'll see that they've now jumped over there to the right hand side. So now what we need to do is rotate these things one more time, because like the orientation of these 3 planks is always going to be lined up with the short sides on the crate. So that should be simple, right? They're on the x-axis, so let's just rotate them along the x-axis. Let's punch 90 into the rotation value for x, and oh crap. That's not exactly what we wanted to see. And well, long story short, more 3D math. There's a lot of weird 3D math things, very complex 3D math things here in Blender that I tend to skip over, and this will be one of them. So here's what I'd like to do in this situation. The trick is to basically orient your camera such that the axis you want to rotate around is sticking out of your monitor. So in this case, we want to set up the camera in Blender using whether it's numpads, rotating around however you want, such that the x-axis, the red line there, is basically pointing out of our monitor. Then press R and begin your rotation operation. So this way you're just kind of rotating with the mouse a little bit, or you can go almost all the way, it's up to you. And what you want to see is look at which of the 3 rotation parameters there changes, and then you can change that value to the proper numerical value. In this case, it's the y-axis being rotated, and we want to change that to 90. Awesome, we're good to go at this point. So next step we're going to do is take this piece we just duplicated, rotated, all that fun stuff, and move it to the 2 remaining sides. Now the top of the crate, if you look at the actual game token, doesn't have that detail, so we're not going to put it on up there. The final step here is to give the crate a hex base. Now in Blender, a hexagon is just a very bad approximation of a circle. So what we want to do is we want to add a new cylinder mesh. So Shift A, mesh, choose cylinder. And then in the lower left hand corner, go down a little box that says add cylinder, and you bring that up, and you want to set the number of vertices to 6. And what this will do is it'll create a 6-sided cylinder, which, like I said, is going to be a hexagon. For the radius, I made them be 8.5, because even though once again it says meters there, it's actually millimeters. The depth, 2 millimeters is probably fine. You can set it to something else if you want. And then you're going to see you've got your space, but it's in the wrong place, isn't it? It's in the middle. So just grab it and drag it down along the z-axis until it kind of overlaps the bottom of the crate by a very small amount. Maybe a millimeter, if that. It's kind of up to you. It doesn't need to be very much. Just got to be a little bit of an overlap, even in this case just a few tenths of a millimeter, just so that your slicer program is going to know that that's one object and it'll treat it as such. So we are just about done with the modeling process. The one thing we want to do is join the hex base to the crate. So shift click on both of them, hit Control J, and then give it a name like the crate. Now at this point here, we're going to do a little bit more Blender math. So we need to jump in to edit mode. We want to select all the vertices, so press A to select them all, press Shift N. Now, one of these days I'll probably have to explain what this actually is doing, because it is actually important in math. But a funny little story, if you ever played Doom 2, and this is the original Doom 2, not the new Doom 2-ish they just released. I don't know if they call it the new Doom 2, but regardless, the original Doom 2. And you got to the final level where you use the cheat codes to clip through the walls. You can go open the creature's brain, and you can look back out, and you can see the world but not the brain. That's kind of this thing. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, you probably never played that original game. If you didn't, it's a really tragedy. The original Doom series is fantastic. But that actually has something to do with what's going on right here. But regardless, do the recalculate outside, and your 3D slicer program will be happy. Okay, with that all set, just get yourself back out of edit mode, and you want to export this object to an STL file, and send it out to your 3D slicer program of choice. Well, there you go. You got the modeling done. At this point, hopefully you've also got the printing done, which, that was like 2 seconds ago, so it's kind of a silly transition. But, that's video editing for you. It's a number of days later for me. Anyway, for painting these guys up, what you want to do, at least what I did, is I used a brown spray primer. In this case, it was from the Army Painters War Paint series. Good thing I got another one in my hand. I then dry brushed on a flesh color. I think it was Kislev Flesh, something like that. It's a Caucasian flesh color from Games Workshop Citadel line of paints. And then finally, as I keep dropping these, finally then I did a wash of Seraphim Sepia. That's also Games Workshop Citadel line of paints. And I said finally there, but then I lied, there's one more step, which was to paint the hex base black with a black color, which I used Abaddon Black from Games Workshop Citadel line of paint. So the painting process is pretty simple and straightforward. But once you got that, you're ready to go. And hopefully this tutorial helped you out with some interesting little tricks for Blender. There's a whole lots of things you can do with that software. And, like I said, the knife tool, it's very dangerous, but it's very powerful. Some point in the future we'll dive more into that. And I'll probably move on to doing some more serious miniature modeling not too far in the future. So hit subscribe if you like those videos and all that other wonderful YouTube crap. So once again, I'm Jason, the creator of the Tabletop Battlefield. Thanks for watching and have a great week.